What happens when a billionaire CEO, known for his icy control and spotless image, finds himself trapped all night with the one woman who refuses to play by his rules? Ethan Whitmore built his empire on discipline, numbers, and silence. Claire Dawson carried nothing but her father's hospital bills, a fraying raincoat, and a stubborn kind of hope. Their worlds were never meant to collide. And yet, a wrong door, a sudden storm, and a citywide blackout forced them together in the glass tower above Seattle. In the dim light of emergency lamps, secrets were spoken that no headline could ever capture. A plea slipped from Ethan's guarded lips. Don't leave me. But could Claire trust a man whose life was built on appearances? Could Ethan risk opening his heart to someone who demanded truth, not performance? This is not just a story of wealth and power. It's a story of mistakes that became turning points, storms that revealed hidden fears, and two lives learning that real love doesn't follow scripts. So, what would you do if the wrong door led you to the right person? If this question stirs something in you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to join us as we begin this journey. The rain had settled in like a permanent guest over Seattle. Gray clouds pressed low against the skyline, and drops fell with steady insistence, soaking everything they touched. On the corner of 4th Avenue, Claire Dawson pulled her hood tighter, though the fabric had long since lost its strength. Her shoes squelched with every step, and the folder she clutched under her coat was damp at the edges. She whispered to herself, half a prayer, half a joke. Just one good break. That's all I need. One door that actually opens. When she looked up, there it was. Whitmore Tower, 40 floors of steel and glass, rising against the heavy sky. She thought she had found the modest staffing office she was searching for. Instead, she was standing before the headquarters of Whitmore Renewables, a company whispered about in business pages and admired for its scale. To her eyes, it was simply a door against the storm. Inside, the air was warm and smelled faintly of polished stone. Her coat dripped small puddles on the marble floor. At the reception desk, a young man in a navy blazer tapped at a computer that seemed to be protesting. He looked up, impatient. Interview, Claire asked, pushing wet bangs from her forehead. Name? His voice was clipped. Claire Dawson, 10 o'clock slot. The screen froze, then flickered. The receptionist frowned, then shrugged. System's glitching. Go on up 32nd floor. They'll direct you. Claire blinked, but before she could question, he handed her a visitor badge. She took it as though it were a fragile treasure, clipped it to her damp blouse, and whispered thanks. As she crossed the lobby, she passed a janitor kneeling with a mop. The man looked up, startled that someone noticed him. Claire smiled, leaned down, and held the mop bucket steady while he wrung out the cloth. Rain outside, puddles inside. Seems fair, she said softly. The man chuckled, the sound lost under the echo of her squeaky shoes. Unseen by Claire, Margot Whitmore stood near the elevators, waiting for her son. Silver hair framed her lined face, and her sharp eyes caught every detail. She noticed the way Claire spoke to the janitor, not with pity, but with respect. Margot felt a tug of recognition, rare, but real. By the time Claire reached the 32nd floor, her nerves had begun to settle. She followed a corridor lined with photographs of wind farms and solar fields stretching across wide American plains. Each image seemed to hum with possibility. She pushed open a glass door and entered a conference room buzzing with tension. People in tailored suits filled the table, papers scattered like fallen leaves. The chair at the end stood empty, a tablet waiting in front of it. No one stopped her. No one questioned her. A man barked. "Where's the assistant? We need minutes recorded now." Claire slid into the vacant seat, her folder still clutched against her chest. She opened the notepad provided, clicked the pen, and began to write. Years of temp jobs had trained her hand to capture conversations, to organize chaos into sentences. She wrote quickly, clearly, marking each decision point without being asked. Then the door opened, and the room fell still. Ethan Whitmore entered with a presence that carried weight heavier than the storm outside. Tall, precise in movement, his dark suit pressed without flaw, he exuded order. He did not waste a glance until he reached his chair. Only then did his eyes catch the stranger at his side. Claire felt the gaze like a chill. She should have explained, should have excused herself. Yet the room's urgency pulled her deeper. The executives launched into figures, contracts, supply chain issues. Claire wrote it all, the rhythm of her pen steady. Minutes passed, then half an hour. Ethan spoke sparingly, his voice low but commanding. Every word seemed final. Still. His gaze slid toward the corner of his notes, where Claire's handwriting appeared neat and organized. Her presence was out of place, yet oddly functional. When the meeting finally paused, Ethan leaned slightly toward her. His eyes, gray as the storm, searched hers. She braced for rebuke, but before he could speak, an advisor interjected with another urgent matter, and the flow resumed. Claire swallowed, heart racing. She had walked in by mistake, yet here she was, part of a meeting that determined millions. Across the table, Margot Whitmore had slipped in quietly. She watched her son, then the young woman beside him. Something about the scene tugged at her intuition. She folded her hands, choosing silence, storing the moment like a secret card to be played later. As the meeting closed, Ethan finally spoke to Claire, his tone cool. "Who exactly are you?" Claire opened her mouth, words tripping over each other. Before she could answer, Margot's calm voice carried across the room. "She's the one who managed to keep you all on track this morning." Ethan's jaw tightened, unreadable. Claire gripped her pen, feeling the weight of both mistake and miracle pressing upon her. When she left the room, badge still pinned to her chest, she wasn't sure whether she had stumbled into disaster or into the first real chance she'd ever been given. Outside, the rain had not let up. It tapped insistently against the tall windows, as though reminding her that life rarely waits for the perfect moment. And in the quiet that followed, Margot Whitmore considered what she had seen, a drenched young woman with steady hands, who had turned confusion into order. She whispered to herself, perhaps a door opened today, by accident, or maybe not. Ethan Whitmore lived by a calendar that ruled his every step. Each morning began at 5:30. A run along the quiet streets of Queen Anne, a black coffee measured to the ounce, news headlines reviewed in strict order. His office was set at 68 degrees, never warmer, never cooler. Meetings slotted in 15-minute blocks. Every decision weighed like a chess move. It had not always been this way. Years ago, Ethan had learned how quickly one careless word could spread across headlines, how a single misstep could cost more than money. Reporters had painted him as cold, unfeeling, obsessed only with numbers. He never corrected them. Better to live behind glass walls than risk being misread again. By contrast, Claire Dawson had never known such structure. Born and raised in Spokane, she had grown up in a small house with peeling paint but steady laughter. Her father, once a mechanic, now battled a weakening heart that left him moving slower each year. Medical bills stacked like bricks. But Claire met them with humor. She learned to stretch paychecks, to find joy in secondhand coats, to smile even when exhaustion pressed heavy. Her weapon was hope. Some mornings it felt fragile, like paper left in the rain, yet she carried it anyway. Seattle itself seemed to breathe between them, a city wrapped in mist. The ferry horns from Elliott Bay echoed like distant calls. The air smelled of salt water mixed with roasted coffee drifting from every corner cafe. Rain tapped on rooftops with a rhythm the city had long accepted. For Ethan, the city was a stage for deals. For Claire, it was a place of second chances. After the morning meeting where Claire had accidentally taken the secretary's seat, Margot Whitmore had spoken gently but firmly. "She has presence," she told her son later, eyes glinting with quiet conviction. "Give her a week, nothing lost." Ethan resisted. "Mother, we don't hire strangers who wander in off the street." Margot only raised an eyebrow, and yet she steadied a meeting that was veering off track. That is worth something. Against his better judgment, Ethan agreed. A temporary trial. No promises. That afternoon, Claire was shown a desk near his office, a simple space with a computer, a phone, and an inbox already overflowing with requests. She touched the smooth surface, still damp from a wiped cloth, and exhaled. It was not hers. Not yet. But it was a beginning. She studied the system, a labyrinth of digital calendars and color-coded spreadsheets. At first, the screen blurred. Acronyms meant little. Reminders flashed with no context. She chewed the end of her pen, muttering small jokes to herself to ease the tension. If I survive this, Dad owes me the good recliner during Sunday football. Hours passed. She learned by trial, by error, by persistence. Small victories, finding a missing file, sorting overlapping appointments gave her courage. Ethan walked past once, his expression unreadable. He noted the way she hummed under her breath while shuffling papers. Disorder, yet not chaos. A kind of rhythm he could not place. Late in the day, he returned to find her standing by the filing cabinet. Papers that had been stacked carelessly now lay in neat rows, but with touches of softness, sticky notes, and pastel colors. Folders marked with hand-drawn stars to highlight urgency. It was order, but not his kind, less rigid, more human. He paused at the doorway. Claire glanced up, surprised to see him watching. I hope you don't mind, she said quietly. The files looked like they were drowning. Ethan should have objected. It was not her role, not her place. Yet he could not deny the effect. The cabinet looked alive, almost welcoming. For a moment he saw two worlds overlapping the steel lines of his structure and the softer curves of her touch. It unsettled him more than he cared to admit. When evening shadows stretched across Elliott Bay, Claire packed her things. She walked out with wet shoes again, but her step felt steadier. Ethan remained in his office, staring at the glow of the city lights. His mind repeated the image of pastel notes, of a hand that brought warmth into routine. He told himself it was temporary, yet somewhere deeper. A small voice whispered that temporary things have a way of lasting. Sometimes mistakes are not accidents. Sometimes they are the very keys that open the doors we were meant to walk through. The week after Claire first sat at her borrowed desk, Whitmore Tower seemed to test her at every turn. The company calendar, usually Ethan's sacred tool, was wrecked by a glitch in the scheduling software. Meetings overlapped, reminders vanished, and two executives arrived at the same boardroom, claiming the same time slot. Voices rose, tempers flared. Claire, seated quietly in the corner, studied the screen. Years of juggling odd jobs had given her a knack for sorting chaos into something livable. She clicked, dragged, reshuffled, a color here, a note there. In less than an hour, she managed to untangle the disaster, saving the most critical appointment of the day, a contract signing worth millions. When Ethan walked in, expecting to find his empire stumbling, he found calm instead. Executives were seated in the right places, documents ready, signatures flowing. He looked at Claire, who only shrugged, as if patching holes in the ship were the most natural thing in the world. It unsettled him. Efficiency had always been his domain. Yet here was someone who had arrived by mistake, keeping his empire afloat. That afternoon, news hit the business pages again. Old scandals resurfaced the photographs from a charity gala where Ethan had looked detached. The quotes pulled out of context that painted him as unfeeling. Headlines repeated words like cold, ruthless, unreachable. Ethan read them without expression, but inside a dull ache pressed against his ribs. He had spent years building walls, and still they crumbled under a careless pen. The PR team crowded into his office with bright slides and nervous energy. Their proposal was simple: soften his image before the upcoming Renewable Energy Summit. Show warmth, show humanity. Appear less like a machine and more like a man. Ethan almost dismissed them until Margot's voice cut through. She had been silent at the edge of the room, listening. Now she spoke with calm authority. What you need is not another press release, she said. You need someone beside you who makes people see you differently. Someone real, not staged. Her eyes shifted toward Claire, who sat with a folder in her lap, clearly not expecting to be included in such a conversation. Claire stiffened. Me? Margot smiled slightly. Why not? You've already proven you can survive one of his meetings, and you speak like a human, not a headline. The room went quiet. Ethan's gaze met Claire's. He saw surprise, hesitation, and something else, dignity that did not bend easily. Later, in the privacy of his office, Margot repeated the idea. Invite her to accompany you at public events, not as an employee, not exactly, as a companion, a presence. It would help him, she added, glancing at her son, and it would help her too. Ethan frowned. Help her medical bills are heavy, Margot said softly. You may not have noticed, but I pay attention. Claire overheard fragments when she was called in. The offer was laid out in careful words. She would appear with Ethan at selected functions, present a warmer image, nothing more. Compensation would be fair, enough to ease her father's hospital costs. Her heart pulled in two directions. Part of her bristled at the thought of being a hired companion, a figure in someone else's narrative. Another part remembered the nights counting pills with her father, the worry etched in his face when bills arrived. That evening, she sat by the window of her small rented room in Queen Anne. The city lights blurred through raindrops on the glass. She wrote numbers on a scrap of paper: rent, utilities, prescriptions. The totals pressed heavy. Her pride whispered no. Her reality whispered yes. She thought of her father's smile when she told him good news. How he always said, "Claire, you carry more strength than you know." Maybe strength now meant bending without breaking. The next morning, she walked into Ethan's office with her chin lifted. "I'll do it," she said, "but only with boundaries. No one confuses this for something it isn't. Respect stays intact." Agreed. Ethan regarded her for a long moment, then he nodded once. Agreed. The contract was drawn up with clinical precision, yet it felt anything but clinical. Claire signed with steady hand, though her pulse raced, that night. As rain streaked the wide windows of his penthouse office, Ethan stood looking out at the city. Claire's name echoed in his mind, carrying weight he did not want to admit. This arrangement was supposed to be strategy, yet already it felt like a game with rules he did not understand. Seattle glowed below, ferries cutting across Elliott Bay like slow-moving lanterns. Ethan pressed a palm against the glass, cold against his skin. For the first time in years, he sensed that control might be slipping not through scandal, not through rivals, but through the presence of one determined woman who had walked into his world by mistake. He carried storms inside him. She walked through the rain with nothing but a fraying raincoat and a stubborn smile. The morning began like so many others: gray sky, sidewalks slick with drizzle, commuters moving quickly under umbrellas. Claire arrived at Whitmore Tower balancing a paper cup of coffee, her folder, and the straps of her worn bag. She pressed the elevator button with her elbow. The door opened, and just as she stepped inside, the cup slipped. Coffee spread across the polished floor in a brown puddle. A hush fell in the small space as two executives stared at her. Claire knelt quickly, pulling tissues from her bag. "Guess the floor needed caffeine, too," she joked, dabbing at the spill. Her face flushed, but she kept moving, humming softly as she worked. The executives exchanged a glance, and one even chuckled. By the time the elevator reached the top floor, the moment had shifted. The mess was gone, replaced by an odd sense of ease. Ethan saw her later, still blotting the damp folder. He should have frowned. Instead, he paused. The tension in the corridor seemed lighter, as if she had carried the awkwardness away with her. The next day, her raincoat tore on the edge of a door handle. A jagged rip stretched across the sleeve. Instead of hiding it, she lifted the torn fabric and laughed. "Seattle fashion," she quipped to the receptionist. "One of a kind." The receptionist grinned. Even the malfunctioning elevator seemed to conspire. When it groaned to a halt between floors for a full 3 minutes, Claire leaned against the wall and announced, "Well, at least we're safe from the rain here." Nervous faces softened. Someone laughed out loud. From a distance, Ethan watched these small episodes unfold. He had lived in a world where mistakes meant headlines, where flaws were magnified until they became weapons. Claire, by contrast, turned flaws into moments of connection. He found himself observing, silent, storing the images in memory. One evening, they were scheduled to meet with potential partners. Instead of the fine restaurants Ethan usually chose, Claire suggested a small cafe by the bay, its windows fogged from steam, its tables mismatched, its menu handwritten on chalkboard. At first, Ethan resisted. Appearances mattered, yet Margot encouraged it quietly. "Try seeing the world from her side," she said. So he went. The cafe smelled of roasted garlic and sea air drifting through a cracked window. A waitress with tired eyes set down bowls of clam chowder and fresh bread. Claire wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic, savoring the heat. For a while, they spoke of work contracts, schedules, travel. But as the minutes passed, the conversation shifted. Claire told him about Spokane, about watching her father fix cars with grease on his hands, about the way neighbors traded casseroles when times were hard. Ethan listened, unfamiliar with such rhythms, but drawn to the picture she painted. When he asked about her father's health, she hesitated, then spoke honestly. "It's tough. Some days he can hardly climb the stairs. But he jokes about it, says if his heart slows down enough, maybe time will too." Ethan found himself silent, stirred by the mix of sorrow and humor. He wanted to ask more, but he stopped himself. Boundaries, contracts. He reminded himself. Still, something inside him softened. At one point, Claire reached for the breadbasket and accidentally brushed her sleeve against the water glass. It tipped, sending ice across the table. She gasped, blotting with napkins, cheeks pink. Then she laughed at her own clumsiness. It was then that Ethan did something he had not done in months. He laughed too, not a polite chuckle, not a forced smile for cameras, but a genuine laugh that surprised even him. It broke through the steel air he carried, just for a moment. Claire looked up, startled, then smiled wider, as if that sound alone was worth the spill. Later, as they walked back to the car, the lights of Elliott Bay shimmered against the dark water. Claire pulled her torn coat tighter, humming under her breath. Ethan glanced sideways, the image fixing itself in his mind, a woman who carried storms differently, not by resisting them, but by finding light within. The PR team, meanwhile, circled with new plans. The Renewable Energy Summit was approaching, and they wanted Claire at Ethan's side. The first public test. When Ethan returned to his office that night, he stood at the window, watching the reflection of city lights on rain-streaked glass. The thought of appearing with Claire in front of cameras should have unsettled him. Yet, strangely, it did not. Something had shifted. The storm inside him was still there. But for the first time, he wondered if it could quiet. It was only a contract. Rules, boundaries, no emotions. They reminded themselves of that again and again, as if repetition would keep the lines clear. The agreement was written in careful language, reviewed by attorneys who measured every phrase. Claire would accompany Ethan to specific industry events. She would appear at his side during certain dinners and panels. She would help soften the edges of his public image. In return, she would be compensated fairly enough to cover her father's rising medical bills. They sat across from each other when the final details were signed. Ethan's expression was unreadable, as if carved from stone. Claire's hand shook slightly as she placed her signature, not from fear, but from the weight of compromise. Afterward, Ethan looked at her and said quietly, "We keep it professional. Respect, privacy, no confusion." Claire nodded, "No confusion." She echoed, but even as she said it, a part of her wondered if such clarity could survive real life. The first test came sooner than expected. The Northwest Energy Forum, a gathering of investors, engineers, and policymakers, filled a wide conference hall near Elliott Bay. Bright banners hung overhead, proclaiming the future of clean power. Suits filled the room. the air thick with ambition. Ethan moved through the space with practiced control, his stride purposeful, his handshake firm. Claire walked beside him, a step behind, careful not to overshadow yet visible enough to be noticed. She wore a simple navy dress, borrowed pearls at her ears, and the same smile she used when reassuring her father after difficult doctor visits. At first, the crowd watched cautiously. Ethan's reputation preceded him. They expected cold precision, perhaps a curt nod. But when Claire greeted a technician by asking about his family farm, or laughed softly with an assistant about the endless Seattle rain, the atmosphere shifted, the stiffness drained, conversations loosened. Investors began to see not just a CEO, but a man standing beside someone approachable. Questions flowed more easily. Agreements came with fewer sharp edges. From a distance, Margot Whitmore observed. She noted the way her son's shoulders eased as Claire spoke. She saw how his gaze lingered a fraction too long, how his posture softened in her presence. The shift was subtle, but unmistakable. A mother's intuition does not miss such things. The evening continued. At one point, an awkward moment threatened to unravel the polished scene. A visiting official made a careless remark about past scandals, thinly veiled but pointed. Silence hovered, eyes turned to Ethan, waiting for a defensive response. Before he could speak, Claire stepped in. Her tone was light, her words woven with humor. She redirected the conversation toward the progress of renewable projects, framing the remark as a compliment disguised as concern. The tension dissolved. Laughter rippled around the table. The official flushed, then joined in the new thread of discussion. Ethan said nothing, but inside, something shifted. He had always faced attacks with armor, meeting sharpness with sharper edges. Claire had done the opposite, deflecting with grace, keeping dignity intact for everyone. It was a lesson he had not expected to learn. Later, as the event wound down, Ethan escorted her toward the car. The rain had returned, tapping against the pavement, reflecting neon lights from the harbor. Claire's coat was damp again, but she walked lightly, as though the evening had cost her nothing. In the quiet of the car, Ethan glanced at her. She was scrolling through her phone, checking messages from the hospital. Her brow furrowed for a moment, then smoothed when she saw a reassuring update. He realized then that this woman, who had agreed to a contract of pretend, carried storms heavier than his own, and somehow, she walked through them with unshaken warmth. That night, back in his office, Ethan stood at the window overlooking the dark waters of the bay. The city lights glittered like scattered coins. For years, numbers had been his comfort, the precision of charts, the solidity of contracts. Yet tonight, numbers felt empty beside the image of a woman who had turned awkward silence into laughter. For the first time in a long while, peace settled over him. Not the peace of victory or profit, but the quiet of companionship, even if only borrowed. He reminded himself it was only a contract, but deep down, he already knew the truth. This arrangement was shaking something he thought unshakable. Love stories rarely move in straight lines. They twist at corners, veer at crossroads, bending the heart with choices both safe and uncertain. The ferry ride to Bainbridge Island began under a sky layered with mist. The deck smelled of salt, and gulls circled overhead, their cries mixing with the hum of the engine. Claire leaned against the railing, her hands tucked into the pockets of her coat. For once, she allowed herself to breathe. No marble floors, no boardrooms, no stiff glances, just the sway of the water. Claire Dawson, a voice called, steady and familiar. She turned and saw him, Mark Ellis. His broad frame carried the ease of someone used to lifting more than his share. His paramedic jacket half-zipped against the chill. His smile was warm, touched by recognition. "Mark," she said, surprised. "It's been years." They spoke easily, as though time had folded in on itself. Mark asked about her father, recalling evenings when he had stopped by the Dawson garage, sharing sodas while her dad fixed an old pickup. The memories rose like gentle waves, laughter, grease-stained hands. the comfort of people who showed up when needed. Claire's voice softened. He's slower now, but still stubborn. Still himself. Mark nodded. You're still the one carrying more than you should. Some things don't change. His gaze was steady, protective, as though nothing could shake it. From across the deck, Ethan watched. He had been reviewing notes for the event, his mind on schedules and talking points. But his eyes kept drifting back to the sight of Claire laughing with another man. The sound of her laughter struck him differently now. He had grown used to it, even relied on it. But hearing it ring out for someone else stirred something sharp inside. Jealousy was not a feeling he entertained often, yet here it was, unwelcome, undeniable. He tried to dismiss it. Mark was simply a piece of her past, a reminder of a life that had nothing to do with him. And yet, when Mark touched her elbow to steady her as the ferry rocked, Ethan felt a knot tighten in his chest. The ferry horn blared, echoing across the bay. Claire excused herself politely, promising Mark they would catch up later. She returned to Ethan's side, cheeks brightened by the sea wind. Ethan said nothing, but the silence carried weight. By the time they reached Bainbridge, clouds had thickened. The event was hosted in a modest hall filled with local leaders and environmental advocates. Tables were dressed simply, the smell of clam chowder drifting from the kitchen. During a panel, a microphone failed, sputtering static. Attendees shuffled, murmurs rising. The organizer panicked, fumbling with wires. Claire stepped forward, calm as if she had done it 100 times. She projected her voice without a mic, inviting patience, guiding the flow until the system was restored. Ethan watched, struck again by the way she steadied others. Where he used authority, she used presence. Where he built walls, she built bridges. When the session resumed, the tension had eased. People leaned in with more trust, less suspicion. Ethan realized she had given him something his power never could, a softer kind of influence. As the evening closed, forecasts flashed across phones. A storm warning spread through the room. Wind gusts, possible outages, ferry delays. The island would feel it first, but Seattle would not escape. The thought pressed against Ethan's chest. Power grids, contracts, reputations those he knew how to manage. But storms of the heart, storms of circumstance, those left him unmoored. On the ride back, mist thickened into fog. The ferry horn wailed, long and low. Claire leaned near the window, her reflection faint against the dark water. Ethan glanced at her, words caught behind his teeth. He wanted to ask about Mark, about the look in her eyes when she spoke to him. He wanted to say that storms unsettled him, less than the thought of losing something not yet his. Instead, he stayed silent, gripping the railing until his knuckles whitened. Through the fog, Seattle's lights shimmered faintly, blurred but steady. Ethan stared at them, fear curling quiet and sharp inside him, the fear that the connection he barely understood might slip away before he had the courage to claim it. The storm arrived without mercy. By late evening, rain lashed against Whitmore Tower with sharp bursts that rattled the glass panes. Gusts howled through the steel bones of the city. Lights flickered once, twice, then vanished. The hum of the building fell silent, replaced by the uneven drone of emergency generators. A dim amber glow filled the executive floor, making shadows stretch long across polished walls. The air carried the sharp scent of ozone, mingled with the faint odor of wet concrete rising from streets below. Ethan stood near the wide windows, staring into the storm. The city that usually pulsed with neon was swallowed by darkness, its skyline fractured by scattered points of emergency light. He pressed a palm to the cold glass. Beneath his tailored composure, unease clawed quietly. Behind him, Claire tested the locked doors. Security systems had defaulted to containment. The heavy mechanisms would not budge. She turned back, brushing damp hair from her face. "We're stuck," she said softly. Her words settled into the silence. Trapped on the top floor of a skyscraper, with nothing but the storm outside and shadows inside. Ethan adjusted his cufflinks, though there was no audience to impress. "The systems will reset soon," he muttered, but the note of certainty in his voice was thinner than usual. Claire eased into one of the leather chairs, drawing her knees closer, as if conserving warmth. The emergency lights hummed faintly overhead. She listened to the wind battering the glass, the distant creaks of the tower adjusting to the gale. "You don't like this," she observed after a pause. Ethan kept his gaze on the storm. "I don't like being powerless." Her lips curved in a faint, knowing smile. "No one does. But sometimes it's the only way we remember what matters." He turned toward her, ready to dismiss the thought, but the words stuck in his throat. In the low light, her face was calm, not afraid. He wondered how she carried that steadiness when he felt his own chest tightening with the thought of things beyond his control. Time moved slowly. The minutes stretched. With every gust, the tower groaned like an old ship at sea. Claire's voice broke the silence again. She spoke of Spokane, of quiet nights when the power went out and neighbors gathered with candles and thermoses of soup. "We used to tell stories until the lights came back," she said. "It was the only time the world slowed down enough for us to hear each other." Ethan let the words settle, then found himself speaking in return. His childhood was different. Silence in grand halls, expectation sharper than thunder, affection measured in achievements. He admitted, almost reluctantly, that he had never liked storms. They reminded him too much of chaos. "Chaos isn't always destruction," she said. "Sometimes it clears the air." The hum of the generator faltered, then steadied again. They both flinched, caught by the reminder of fragility. For a long while, they sat in the half-light. Claire leaned back, closing her eyes, her breathing slow and even. Ethan found himself watching her, noticing how calm lived in the curve of her shoulders, how warmth lingered even in silence. Eventually, she opened her eyes. "What scares you most?" "Ethan," the question was quiet but unyielding. He considered deflecting, but the storm outside pressed truth closer. "Losing control," he admitted, then, after a pause, "and losing people before I know how to keep them." Her gaze softened. She did not push further. Instead, she spoke of her father, how every hospital bill felt like sand slipping through her hands, how fear had become part of her daily routine. Yet she still woke each day, choosing hope over despair. The honesty between them filled the space more than the dim light did. For once, there were no contracts, no facades, only two people in a storm, confessing the weight they usually carried alone. At some point, Claire laughed gently when her stomach growled. Of course, trapped in a tower and no snacks. Ethan almost smiled. He offered his watch, half a joke. "It's not edible." The laugh eased the heaviness. For a moment, the storm outside seemed distant, muffled by shared humanity. Hours blurred. They spoke less, rested more. Claire curled under her coat on the couch, while Ethan remained in the chair opposite, his eyes drawn to her even as exhaustion pressed against him. Sometime near dawn, the generators hiccuped, then power surged. Lights blinked back to life, stark and white. The sudden brightness felt almost intrusive. Claire stirred, rubbing her eyes. Ethan rose, stepping closer, drawn by something he could not explain. He hesitated, then spoke, voice low, almost swallowed by the hum of systems restarting. "Don't leave me." The words slipped out raw, unplanned, as though the storm itself had ripped them from his guarded chest. Claire froze, the echo of his plea settling in the air between them. Her eyes searched his face, not for clarity, but for sincerity. Before either could speak again, alarms beeped, systems reloaded, and the spell of night broke. The building awakened, reality intruded. Claire stood, smoothing her coat, steadying herself. Ethan turned back to the window. The storm had passed, but a pale gray dawn pressed against the horizon. The night had changed something. What daylight would do with it? Neither of them knew. Some mornings feel like endings, even when the sun still rises. After the storm, Whitmore Tower buzzed with hurried energy. The emergency had passed, but the city still whispered about the blackout. Phones vibrated, Emails flew, and the PR team gathered with quick, bright eyes. To them, every crisis carried a headline waiting to be spun. They leaned in around Ethan, their voices layered with urgency. Last night could be a turning point. Trapped with your secretary, it's humanizing, relatable. We can frame it as resilience, leadership under pressure. Claire sat quietly at the edge of the table, her cheeks flushed, not with pride, but with discomfort. She remembered the soft glow of the emergency lights, the honesty in the dark, the words he had whispered, and now, here it was, reduced to bullet points on a slide deck. Her pulse quickened. They were turning something sacred into spectacle. She excused herself with a polite smile, though her stomach churned. In the hallway, her phone buzzed. A message from Mark, helping at the community shelter today. Power's still out for dozens of families. We could use extra hands. Claire stared at the text, her throat tightening. Mark's world was simple. Grounded flashlights in gymnasiums, blankets handed to shivering children, soup ladled into paper bowls, no cameras, no spin, just need and response. She looked back toward the glass doors of the conference room. Inside, Ethan was listening, his face unreadable, his silence a form of agreement. She realized that silence, once comforting, now cut deep. That night, she packed slowly in the service department. The space smelled faintly of polished wood and industrial soap, too sterile to ever feel like hers. She folded her blouses carefully, tucked her father's medical forms back into a folder, and zipped the suitcase shut. Her reflection in the mirror startled her. She looked tired, older than she remembered. Hope, the weapon she always carried, felt heavy tonight. The next morning, she left her access badge on the kitchen counter. No note, just absence. She sent a request to HR, asking to transition her role to remote support. The email was short, formal, almost cold, her only defense. Ethan noticed by noon. He stepped into the apartment, expecting her, and found silence instead. The badge glinted on the counter, his chest tightened. He had heard silence before in hospitals, in empty houses, but this one was sharper. He opened his laptop, saw the notification, her request. He read it twice, then again, as though repetition might alter its meaning. He could have called. He could have walked down the hall, demanded an explanation. Instead, he closed the lid, pressed his hands against the desk, and chose quiet. Silence had always been his shield. Now it was his punishment. Days blurred, meetings came and went. Claire appeared only in digital form, calendars updated, schedules aligned, reminders sent with precision. Her emails were polite, efficient, stripped of warmth. The playful notes on Post-its had vanished, replaced by timestamps and bullet points. Each message landed in Ethan's inbox like a cold draft. He read them too many times, searching between the lines for traces of what had been said in the dark. He found none. At night, the city glittered again, repaired and restless. Ethan stood at the window of the tower, staring across Elliott Bay, waiting for clarity that never arrived. He replayed her voice in memory, the way she had told him storms could clear the air. Yet now, after the storm, the air felt heavier. Claire sat in her small apartment across town, the hum of a borrowed space heater filling the silence. She kept her phone face down, avoiding calls, avoiding the ache that came with hope. She told herself this was necessary, that leaving before she lost herself was the only way to survive. And yet, every time she opened her inbox, she half expected something different. Not a schedule, not a memo, just words from him, unguarded. They never came. One evening, while scrolling through messages, she saw another note from Mark. A picture this time, kids playing tag in the dim light of a shelter, laughter defying the outage. Underneath he wrote, "Hope shows up even in the dark." Claire smiled faintly, but the smile hurt, because hope had shown up in the dark once before, in a tower lit by generators, and she had walked away from it. The wound of departure cut deeper than any argument could. There had been no fight, no accusations, only absence, which spoke louder than anger. The emails between them grew colder, more mechanical. They both knew it, neither admitted it. And so, the morning after the storm stretched into weeks, not with thunder, not with lightning, but with silence the kind that builds walls higher than any skyscraper. Silent distance has a way of making people hear their own hearts more clearly. Claire filled her days with movement, not noise. She joined Mark at the community shelter, where the lingering storm damage still left families displaced. Rows of cots lined the gym floor. The smell of soup lingered with detergent and damp coats. She moved through the space with quiet purpose, helping children find books, organizing food donations, guiding volunteers into order. People responded to her calm, her mix of warmth and practicality. When a mother broke down, overwhelmed by weeks of uncertainty, Claire knelt beside her, listened, and held her hand until words returned. Mark watched from across the room. "You've always had this gift," he said later, while stacking boxes, making people believe the ground is steady, even when it shakes. Claire smiled, but her chest tightened. She thought of another man, one who feared storms because they stole control. Back home, her father's health stabilized. The medication routine settled. She spent evenings reading aloud to him, the ticking of the old wall clock, a steady rhythm in their small apartment. For the first time in months, she felt anchored. And yet, at night, when the city quieted, memories returned. The glow of amber lights, the sound of wind against glass, the words whispered like a plea. She had left them behind, but they had not left her. Across the bay, Ethan buried himself in routine. Meetings stacked like bricks, numbers aligned in neat columns. His calendar pulsed with color-coded demands, and still, his days felt hollow. One evening, Margot entered his office without knocking. She studied him with eyes that missed little. "You look tired," she said. "I'm fine." She crossed her arms. Fine is the currency of people who are breaking quietly. "Do you know the cost of control?" "Ethan," he didn't answer. She pressed on. "It keeps you safe, yes. But it also keeps you alone. Safety and loneliness often wear the same suit." Her words hung heavy. He turned back to his desk, but the numbers blurred. He remembered the sound of laughter in the storm, the warmth of presence that no schedule could replicate. Weeks passed. Reports trickled in. A team review noted how meetings had become stiffer, how morale dipped. They mentioned Claire's absence not by name, but by the echo she left. The office feels colder, the rhythm less human. Ethan read the lines twice, his jaw tight. For years, he had believed productivity lived in precision. Now he wondered if it also required something softer. Meanwhile, Margot worked quietly. She knew pushing Ethan too hard would only send him deeper into retreat. So, she crafted another path. A fundraising gala was scheduled on Bainbridge Island, supporting coastal restoration. Invitations went out, one by one, until 2 sat at the top of her list. Claire received hers in the mail, tucked in a simple envelope. She held it at her kitchen table, fingers brushing the embossed lettering. A part of her bristled was this another attempt to turn her into an image, a prop. Yet the letter spoke not of optics, but of purpose, restoring shores battered by storms. Work that mattered, stripped of spin. She left it on the counter for days, walking past it each morning. She told herself she didn't need to go, yet something inside whispered that perhaps value could be found again, not in a contract, but in service. Ethan's invitation arrived the same week. He opened it without expression, though Margot watched closely. He read the details, then set it down. For a long moment, he said nothing. Finally, she asked, "Will you go?" He exhaled slowly. "I don't know." That night, he stood at the window of his apartment. The city lights stretched across the bay. He thought of the island, the ferry ride, the fog. He thought of Claire, laughter carried on the wind. The silence between them had grown wide. But silence, he realized, was not the same as closure. The gala date circled closer. Claire pressed the invitation between pages of her planner. as if hiding it from herself. Ethan left his on the counter, its edges curling, two people in different rooms, staring at the same choice. To stay apart, or to walk into a hall where purpose, not publicity, set the stage. Sometimes it takes fog and restless wind to bring two people back to the same place. The charity gala on Bainbridge carried Margot Whitmore's quiet fingerprints. The hall was modest but warm, filled with townspeople, donors, and volunteers. Lanterns glowed against the wood beams, the scent of salt air drifting through the open doors. Claire had agreed to attend, after days of hesitation. She arrived in a simple dress, her notes tucked in a folder. She was not here for appearances, she reminded herself. She was here to speak about compassion in crisis, about the way words could calm fear as much as blankets or soup could warm the body. When she stepped onto the stage, the microphone trembled slightly in her hands. Then she began. She spoke of families finding courage in shelters, of laughter echoing even in the dark, of neighbors carrying one another through storms. Her voice was steady, her eyes bright. The audience leaned in, not out of duty but out of genuine attention. At the back of the room, Ethan watched. He had not planned to be moved, but he was. He saw not just a woman filling a role, but someone living a truth he had only begun to understand. Margot's gaze flicked between them, satisfied. After the applause faded, the crowd shifted into smaller conversations. Dinner plates clinked, violins hummed softly in the background. Claire avoided Ethan at first, weaving through groups of volunteers and local leaders. But she felt his presence at the edge of every room, quiet, deliberate. By the time the event ended, the fog outside had thickened. Ferry operators announced delays. The bridge was closed due to high winds. Travelers were directed toward the community guest house funded by the Whitmore Foundation. Claire sighed when she heard. It felt like the universe had trapped her again. The guest house stood near the water, its wooden frame creaking softly in the gale. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and old quilts. Volunteers handed out blankets and keys. Claire received a small room, just down the hall from Ethan's. It was private enough to feel safe, but close enough that silence would not last long. She set her bag on the narrow bed, sat for a moment, then rose. The storm outside rattled the shutters. She knew avoiding him would only tighten the knot in her chest. She found him in the common room, seated near the fireplace. The glow painted his face in shifting light and shadow. He looked up as she entered, and for a heartbeat, neither spoke. Finally, Claire drew a breath. If you want me to stay involved, if you want me anywhere near your world, then the story of that night stays ours. Not PR, not spin. Ours. Her voice did not shake. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. The fire cracked softly between them. I never wanted it turned into strategy, he said, but I don't know how to stop people from using what they think they see. Claire's eyes softened, though her guard stayed firm. Then you tell them no. Not everything has to be leveraged. Some things just are. The wind howled through the chimney. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, the steel in his posture had loosened. The truth is, he admitted, I'm afraid of needing someone. Afraid of it being real. Because if it is real, I can lose it. Her breath caught. She had waited for honesty, but hearing it still startled her. Before she could answer, her phone buzzed on the table. A message from the hospital, her father's condition, stable but fragile. A reminder that time was never guaranteed. She stared at the screen, her throat tight. Ethan noticed. Is it your father? She nodded. Yes. It's always him. Every choice I make comes back to him. They sat in silence, the fire snapping, the storm pressing against the windows. For the first time since the night of the blackout, they were face to face with truth. Not contracts, not silence, just two people in a storm, again. When Claire finally stood, blanket draped around her shoulders, she looked at Ethan with steady eyes. We can't build anything if it's for show. If there's a chance, it has to be for real, or not at all. He nodded slowly, as though the weight of her words both burdened and freed him. That night, she returned to her room, lying awake under the thin quilt, listening to the wind shake the eaves. Down the hall, Ethan remained by the fire, staring into the flames as if searching for a language older than silence. By morning, the storm would clear, the ferry would run, choices would return. But for now, in the fragile pause of a forced reunion, the unspoken hung heavy. Would they leave the island as strangers again, or as something closer to the truth? Mature love is not born in a moment of impulse. It grows in a series of choices, each one requiring courage. The morning after the storm, Ethan made his first choice. When the PR team circled like hawks around his office, ready with drafts and strategies, he raised a hand. "Stop," he said, his voice calm but final. They blinked, confused. "Sir, this story could soften." "I said stop." He closed the folder on the table, sliding it back across the polished wood. The blackout, the tower. What happened that night, it doesn't belong to headlines. It doesn't belong to you. It belongs to us. The risk was immediate. He knew the board would frown. Investors preferred narratives, not silences. But for the first time, Ethan found he did not care. Control meant nothing if it cost truth. Meanwhile, Claire returned to her father's side. She brewed tea, measured pills, adjusted blankets. The hospital smell clung to her clothes, but her father's smile made the weight easier. That afternoon, Ethan appeared not with flowers, not with promises, but with a folder of medical resources. He laid them on the table carefully. Specialists, treatment options, insurance pathways. "You decide," he told her. Claire opened the folder slowly. For once, the power was not in his hands. He had shifted it to hers. It startled her, this form of support that was not control but empowerment. She looked at him, unsure what to say. His eyes, steady but vulnerable, seemed to carry only one message. "I want to walk this with you, not ahead of you." The ferry reopened the following morning. At the dock, mist curled above the water, and gulls wheeled in lazy arcs. Travelers lined up with bags. The hum of anticipation thick in the air. Ethan stood near Claire, his coat buttoned against the chill. His hands were clasped behind his back, but his posture carried no pretense. When the announcement came that boarding would begin soon, he turned to her. "Claire," he began, voice low but sure, "I've built a life on certainty. Numbers, schedules, deals, and it left me safe, but empty. You showed me something else, warmth that comes with unpredictability. It terrifies me, but I don't want to live without it." She held his gaze, silent. "I don't want a contract. I don't want appearances. I want to commit to the uncertainty of you, to the chaos and the calm. If that means living with storms, so be it." Her breath caught. She searched his face, looking for cracks of doubt. "And when the storm clears, when routine comes back, will you still want the mess of me, then?" His reply was simple. "Yes, because it's not mess, it's life." He reached into his coat and pulled out another folder, this one thinner. Inside were sketches and proposals for a new foundation project. At the top, in bold letters, was the name, the Dawson Initiative. A plan to fund community resilience programs in honor of her mother, who had always believed in neighbors helping neighbors. "This is my promise," Ethan said. "Not words, action, a legacy tied to your family's name, not mine. If you'll allow it." Claire's throat tightened. Tears blurred her vision, but she blinked them back. She touched the folder gently, as though afraid it might vanish. "You're asking me to believe in permanence," she whispered, "and I want to, but I need to see it last. Not just in the storm, not just in the rush of change, in the everyday." He nodded, accepting the weight of her caution. "Then I'll prove it, not with speeches, with time." The ferry horn sounded, long and low, calling passengers aboard. They walked side by side up the ramp, the wind tugging at their coats. For the first time, neither rushed ahead nor lagged behind. On the upper deck, the city shimmered faintly across the bay, wrapped in morning haze. Claire leaned against the railing, her father's folder tucked safely under her arm. Ethan stood beside her, the Dawson Initiative plans in his hand. They said little as the boat pulled away, but the silence was no longer distance. It was the fragile beginning of something chosen, not forced. Seattle waited with its gray skies, its demands, its relentless pace. But as the ferry cut through the water, both carried lighter hearts. Tomorrow would be ordinary again. Meetings, medications, deadlines. But it would be different now because they had chosen not to walk those days alone. There are places you will never find on a map. They open only when you dare to soften, when you allow yourself to arrive. Months had passed since the storm, since the ferry, since that fragile choice on the edge of the bay. Time had not been easy, but it had been real. At Whitmore Tower, the air felt different now. The glass still gleamed, the schedules still ticked with precision, but the culture had shifted. Meetings began with laughter. Staff lingered a little longer in the break room, sharing more than numbers. A sense of warmth threaded through the building. People credited new policies, but those who paid attention knew better. They knew it began with the CEO himself. Ethan no longer stayed in the office until midnight. He closed his laptop at a reasonable hour. On weekends, he was sometimes seen at shelters, helping sort supplies, standing among volunteers with no name tags or cameras. He still carried his discipline, but it had softened, as though a new rhythm had joined his old one. For Claire, balance was no longer a dream, but a practice. She split her time carefully, part at the company, part at home with her father. His health had stabilized. He moved slowly, but he laughed often, joking with neighbors who dropped by. Mark remained in their lives, a friend who understood limits but stayed present, steady as ever. Claire appreciated that steadiness, but she no longer leaned on it the same way. Her life had grown fuller, stronger. On a cool evening in early spring, a small gathering took place by the water. Lanterns swayed in the breeze. Seattle's skyline shimmered across Elliott Bay. Its lights reflected like scattered jewels. The air smelled of cedar smoke and salt. It was not a grand event. No stage, no reporters, no headlines, just friends, family, and colleagues gathered quietly to witness something tender. Margot sat in the front row, her silver hair catching the glow of lanterns. She clasped her hands, her eyes moist but peaceful. She had orchestrated many moments in her life, but this one she simply received. Claire wore a dress the color of twilight, simple and unadorned. Ethan stood beside her in a dark suit, his hand steady in hers. They spoke not of contracts or plans, but of presence, of choosing each other in the plain light of reality. There was no spectacle, no choreographed display, only vows spoken softly, words meant for ears that mattered, promises not of perfection, but of partnership. The crowd clapped gently, some wiping tears. The night air carried the sound across the bay, mingling with the hum of the city. Later, as the gathering faded, Claire and Ethan stood alone near the railing. The water moved with slow ripples, reflecting the city lights. Claire leaned against him, her head resting lightly on his shoulder. "It doesn't feel like an ending," she said. "That's because it isn't," he replied. "It's just a day, but a day that begins the right way." She smiled, the kind of smile that grows from deep roots. And so, their story found its place not in headlines, not in boardrooms, not even in storms, but in the steady rhythm of days chosen together. Because real love, they had learned, does not need a script, it does not demand grand gestures. Sometimes the mistakes, the detours, the locked doors and delayed ferries, those are the truest paths of all. And now, a word for you, the listener, the watcher, the quiet companion to this journey. What about you? What was your wonderful mistake, the wrong turn, the unexpected delay, the accident that led to something beautiful? Share it in the comments below. From 1 to 10, how would you rate this story? And tell us what kind of story would you like to hear next? Because just as Claire and Ethan found, sometimes the wrong door is the only door that leads us home. Life rarely follows the plan we write for it. Ethan and Claire's story reminds us that the wrong turns the spilled coffee, the broken elevator, even the storm that shut down a city can sometimes lead us exactly where we're meant to be. For Ethan, control had been his shield. For Claire, hope was her only weapon. Alone, each carried their burdens. Together, they discovered that love is not built on perfection, but on presence, on choosing to stay when life feels uncertain. Many of us, especially with age, learn that true strength is not about holding everything together by force. It's about softening enough to let someone in, even when it feels risky. We may not be CEOs or caught in skyscraper blackouts, but we all know what it means to fear loss, to guard our hearts, and to long for connection that is real. The lesson is simple, but not easy. Mistakes can be gifts, storms can be teachers, and love, real love, does not follow scripts. It grows in the small, ordinary moments when we dare to trust another soul. So, perhaps the question is not, what if I fail? But what if this misstep is the very doorway to where I belong? Thank you so much for spending your time with this story. If Ethan and Claire's journey touched your heart, please give this video a like, share it with a friend, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more stories of hope, love, and second chances to life. Until next time, take care, and keep believing in the beauty of unexpected beginnings.